Thank you, David, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Elsie, for this wonderful opportunity to be here in this beautiful center, as well as in the presence of beautiful minds and very brilliant conversations. So I am delighted to spend 2 days of my life in this company. Thank you. I do want to thank where I'm housed, as David pointed out. I'm one of his own, and I'm at the John Muir USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, a mouthful, but a wonderful place. Where the primary focus of all of the research that we do is on aging. And as you know, the minute you're conceived and in your mother's womb, you begin to age because cells senesce at that point. And I don't want you to take a morbid view to that, but to point out that it is an ongoing, continual phenomenon. So technologies in diet assessment and interventions in older adults, that is the charge that I've been given to today. And I want to point out that, at least from my understanding, there is not much out there in terms of technologies that are primarily designed and focused on older adults. But that gives us a great opportunity to be able to do this right and do it well and think about all the needs that are going into it and build what would be a wonderful tool or set of tools for this population. I'm going to briefly walk you through the overview of what I'm going to present. First, we'll talk about the diet assessment needs in the older adults and the current technologies that may be applicable or feasible for use in older adults. It's just a sample and not an exhaustive review. And I'm also going to talk about one or two intervention processes that have been adopted or adapted in older adults and finish with the key takeaways. I have no disclosures except that I'm on this NIH grant, which is on a no-cost extension for this year. So why do we care about this older adult population? Why do we have this whole session that's dedicated to them? The reason is because we're going to have to care. This is a rapidly growing population, and as most of you know, we are in less than 15 years going to be faced with one of the most unprecedented scenarios in our population, which is basically that elderly are going to comprise a huge segment of the population. And this is true not only in the United States, where there's going to be almost a doubling of the 65 plus age group, but also around the world. 55 countries are expecting to see 20% of their population being comprised of 65 plus. So it is going to be a need that really has to be met with all kinds of approaches, interventions, and including technology, as is the case today. And the other big factor is that nutrition is a very important lifestyle factor that contributes to both the health and the functioning, and as was just pointed out, functionality in the older years is a very critical need. The other issue is that in terms of nutritional needs, there are two aspects or facets to the story. It's not that you can design apps or tools that only take care of weight control and intake control from the perspective of obesity management. There is also the double burden, as I call it, which is malnutrition in the elderly, which often tends to hide. And I want to use malnutrition here in the context of undernutrition because essentially over and undernutrition is malnutrition. But we're talking about the negative state, if you will, with regards to poorly nourished older adults. And as was pointed out by Dr. Harris, there's a great heterogeneity in the older population, first of all, with regards to the age spectrum, and also the status of the health. There could be 80-year-olds who are just like 60-year-olds. There could be 60-year-olds who could functionally and biologically be like 80-year-olds. So there's that great diversity, if you will, with regards to needs and also in the health and diet in older adults that necessarily has to be adhered to and addressed. And any approach that is designed for this population will have to be tailored to accommodate these differences, both in age groups as well as in diet and health. So that's pretty much the premise of what the need is in terms of what needs to be done for this population. And remember the double burden that I spoke to you about? You might think that this is not entirely true. A lot of us as scientists and biologists have shied away from talking about weight control in the elderly because it's not entirely clear if weight control interventions need to be provided to the elderly. But look at the age spectrum. 65 years and over is this first bar here, and 65 to 75 year old. And this is data from 2007 to 2010, and at least 5 to 6 years delayed or old, if you will. But there is definitely a problem in this age group is what I'm trying to highlight. And there's a bit of a tapering off, if you will, in the 75 plus year, and that's something that really may feed into involuntary weight loss due to malnutrition and other related issues. And that's pretty much what this slide focuses on, that there is this attention to senior malnutrition. And of course, now we don't use the word senior as much as we use older adults, but paying attention to malnutrition in the elderly is a very important need, an assessment need, a nutritional need, and these statistics sort of highlight or underscore the fact that this needs to be examined or looked into. So those two scenarios pretty much give us an idea as to what are the needs in older adults that needs to be looked into. And with regards to diet assessment in older adult, the other issue is the physiology of aging itself, which sort of confounds or complicates the situation. We all know that there is diminishing smell, taste, and functionality, and also cognitive decline. Some of this can be attenuated depending on the lifestyle we choose, but some of it is an obligatory change that happens with age. Memory is another one, and also the ability for older adults to prepare food on their own. Eating out is something that's common. There are a variety of health conditions which have been discussed before that, as you know, chronic disease is one of the largest contributors to morbidity and mortality, and so that is a huge factor in older adults. And then older adults also use supplements, which is something that needs to be captured when looking at diet in this group. And change in living conditions is another key factor with regards to what we provide by way of tools and techniques in this population to be able to assess their nutritional status, to assess their dietary intake. So the challenge with effective dietary assessment in older adults is to distinguish between those who can accurately report their intake on their own versus those that need some kind of observational data to be able to get to what is happening. And with this slide here, I want to underscore that despite the stereotypes, seniors are increasingly among the tech savvy, and I want to qualify that by saying that it is not true that across cultures and across ethnic groups and across the globe there is everyone that's in that age group that's adopting or adapting to this technology. However, age is not a barrier to using and adopting or adapting to technology is something that I do want to point out, and that's somewhat of a common stereotype that's been widely discussed and propagated. And another focus that I want to point out is that 14% of all of the apps and technologies that are out there are nutrition focused, and so diet assessment has some promise for this age group with regards to what can be used. So if you're not in the healthy active group and you're not able to really do it with regards to using the tools and being able to implement the input and feedback that needs to be provided, there are other less intensive input tools and observational data that could really help. And I'm going to just discuss a little bit about the voice recording, which is a spoken language work I'm doing, and pictures from wearables, which Dr. Kerr was very kind enough to share with me, and we'll look at how this could be potentially used very well in this population. One of the points I want to make before I leave this slide is that it would really help for us to be comfortable using these devices, and I say us because I am in that age bracket where it's beginning to be very hard to look at font size and stuff. So simple things like fonts and font enhancements, haptic aids, and others that really make the button larger, do these little things that really make life so much better. Even if cognitively and health-wise you are doing okay, it would be really good to address these needs in the elderly for those who are able to use non-observational devices. So I hate the word solution here. I should have changed that, our approach, because there is really no solution. It's an approach. There are various ideas and theories that are out there that need to be tested, but our approach here is using voice recording or using the spoken language basically tool as a way of recording the food intake. As we know, recording intake is very burdensome, but for the elderly, using just natural spoken language is one cool way to be able to provide the input that is required. And we're working with the folks at the computer science lab at MIT to try to be able to use spoken language and be able to decode from that spoken language quantity of foods, the type of food, as well as the actual sort of pictorial reinforcement, if you will, of what it is that they did eat during the day, and then have a record for the entire day. If there is the ability for that elder or older individual to be able to do this via texting, there is that option as well, but spoken language is what's basically used. We're using a lot of machine learning to be able to recognize voice, and even with my accent, it picks up pretty well, and it's a great tool. There's so much that's gone on in spoken language technology that really helps with being able to recognize voice and then be able to break it down, like I said, to the subparts of what really gets to the core of diet assessment, which is quantity. In the case that it is a branded food, that gets recognized, and then the description of the food is extracted from the spoken language or utterance of the intake for that specific meal, and then the food type is also decoded. There's also the option of building what's called a cache. If you don't want to do this every single day, you could set it up. I always drink orange juice that's canned or raw or whatever your food type is. You set that up as a cache of either preferred foods or, as you know, older adults are creatures of habits, and so it's nice to build a reserve, if you will, of the breakfast foods and others that can be very easily recalled once the spoken utterance for the particular day happens. And as was pointed out yesterday, no technology talk is free from a sort of schematic such as this. Here is again a reinforcement of what is exactly happening in the spoken language recognition of the actual meal as well as that diet assessment. So the user inputs their dietary intake using natural spoken language, and that natural spoken language utterance or speech recognition happens at the processing end, and then there's the semantic processing for the subcomponents that really feed into what's the core of diet assessment, which is quantity mapping, image searching, and the nutrient is provided, or the calorie content and other nutritional information is provided by accessing databases. The USDA standard reference SR databases are very rich in a lot of food types and food quantities and the nutritional information. And Nutritionist is another database that's really rich. We haven't addressed the issues with databases at all, but that is a huge area where some of what's called underreporting is not really due to under-recording, but it's more due to the quality of data that is feeding into the caloric and other nutrient information. So in this case, all of the semantic processing happens, and then the log of what the utterance was is displayed both pictorially and in the form of calories. So that's where we are at now, and like I pointed out, we use crowdsourcing for machine learning for natural language, and we're moving to the point where we're able to make sense out of this data and provide interventional support, and this is something that can very seamlessly be used for older adults. The next tool that I want to talk about a little bit is SenseCam, and this, as I pointed out, Dr. Jacqueline Kerr gave me some of the pictures for it that you'll see in the subsequent slides. But SenseCam is a wearable camera. There are several types now, so we have to use what works best for the older adults. It was pointed out with kids, they tend to lie down and it moves away. It might be the case with older adults as well, but positioning and all of these usage-related interfaces need to be thought through too. But this device is available in the market, and Dr. Kerr says that older adults don't mind wearing the SenseCam, and she has collected data over 100 adults, and she can tell you that when we discuss this in the panel. But in terms of how SenseCam data works is that we have the image that gets recorded continually. The image then gets segmented into the various fractions which are recognized by algorithms that know how to tease out what's food related and what's non-food related in this case. And this is, say, a week's worth of recording, and from that we can get these keyframe image selections to just pull out what's pertaining to food. And here's an algorithm that's been provided and published for memory and trying to remember during the day what the older adult really went through from an experiential perspective, but the same could be used for food as well. And then you get to whether they did their breakfast or not, or lunch or not, or dinner or not, and these kind of qualitative aspects which are required to provide intervention. The advantage with SenseCam is that there is no user input that is required, so it's a very passive approach. You can get information on patterns, portion size, forgotten foods, leftover, brand names, and what has been shown in the very preliminary work that's been done in older adults is that there is significant underreporting of calorie intake, which is which is important from the perspective of obesity, and it could also be very useful for elders who just forget to eat or don't remember that they ate a meal, and to provide appropriate intervention for that. So that pretty much is in what we can get from wearables, which are very passive in terms of the amount of work that needs to be done by the individual, and this was discussed by Carol as well yesterday. And we can also distinguish if we need, eating behavior and other types of, qualitative behavioral information. And finally, we've been talking a lot about device integration. So like someone pointed out yesterday, if you're sitting above a McDonald's, but you're actually in your office, you can differentiate whether you're at work or whether you're eating, and these kind of tools might help with the camera reinforcing that they were actually eating, and the GIS or GPS data validating their location. So thus far I've sort of discussed tools that could be potentially applied in the older adults for nutritional and diet assessment, and now I'm going to move on to the second part, which is intervention. There's two examples that I would like to show with regards to intervention, and one is specific to salt, which as was pointed out yesterday is a very easy thing to do, but here's a group in Auckland, New Zealand that used what's called Salt Switch. And Salt Switch is pretty much an adaptation from what's called Food Switch, which was designed to just differentiate between foods that are healthier or not. And what it does is it provides you with what people need. They need to know what they need to do, and this is often a limitation. We don't have solutions or answers for what in that moment of time people need to do, and Salt Switch does that. So if you're in the supermarket purchasing a product, and again the brand names should have been whited out, but that's not the focus here, but the point is that here's what I'm buying, and there are the options that may help with my goal, which is basically reducing sodium content in the food. So these are the kinds of interventions to help with chronic disease and management of certain conditions that require specific intervention with specific nutrients, or nutrients that really support either a cardiovascular disease profile or diabetes or any of these kinds of conditions. Unfortunately, as we know, one of the biggest limitations is evidence-based data that is out there. This trial is ongoing and we don't have the data published yet, at least. I'm not sure where the investigators are, but hopefully they have a good sample size of those who use, 150 participants who use and do not use it, and a variety of CVD markers as well as actual sodium purchases, and we'll hopefully learn from such studies that we can design tools that would help with providing in-the-moment answers to a point of purchase, or other types of tools that would aid with disease management in daily life. So that's pretty much what they conclude from this design paper, that this will help with evidence-based studies, will help with hopefully creating positive behavior change that's required for disease management. And there's a little bit of, it's strong in the literature that there's a little bit of an incentive or motivation that we've been talking about in the past 2 days with regards to disease management and wanting to make changes, particularly when you're undergoing chronic disease. So that's an example. The Salt Switch is an example of nutritional interventions which get to disease management and nutrient-specific interventions. And here is one that is done in the context of holistically sort of approaching the older adult who is, say, in an institutionalized situation, or needs some kind of a support with monitoring nutrition, and it's more in the context of nutritional interventions for prevention of malnutrition. So I do have a video on this, and what NANA, or the Novel Assessment of Nutrition in Aging, really looks at, and I want to point out that I chose this because it's really designed and focused on the aging or the older population, and it looks at diet, mood, and cognition, as well as physical function, all in one place, in one system or one toolkit. So I'm going to play a video that is going to showcase this, and you'll see why and how this is useful, as well as how they've thought through some of the basic things like font size and other features that really help with adapting or using this technology.
We know that Micronutrient deficiency is a problem in about 30% of the older adult population. We also know that 1 in 3 older adults admitted to hospital are malnourished on admission. And so this gives us some idea that nutrition is a problem in the community, although it's very difficult to assess nutrition in the community at present. We've developed the NANA system to help address some of those problems.
NANA is a new system for older adults to use to keep track of what they're eating and drinking. It's been developed on a touchscreen computer, and we work very closely with hundreds of older people to work out what they would like to see in the system and to make it as easy to use as possible. Do you think the NANA system would be easy to use?
Yes. Well, let's put it this way, if I can use it, anybody can. I didn't find it difficult at all. I do eat smaller meals because of NANA, but I eat something that's nourishing.
Right. So it did make you think about what you were eating.
I never thought about food as much.
And so that shows as well that even when you're older, you can still learn and change to what...
If you wish, you can do it.
NANA's been developed to focus primarily on nutrition, but also on the other factors in a person's life that can influence whether they're eating and drinking properly. And that includes their physical health and activity, their cognitive status and their mood. So for instance, if someone is feeling a bit down, a bit sad, they might stop eating and being less interested in food. And so NANA also has questions to ask them about how they're feeling, can measure their cognitive function, and also help them keep track of whether they're doing enough physical activity as well.
Over the last 3 years, we've done a series of validation studies using NANA. And what we've done is compared the output from the NANA system against traditional methods of dietary assessment and against independent biomarkers of dietary intake. And we're very confident that NANA is an accurate method of dietary assessment in older adults.
Anybody who's interested in what older people are eating, helping them to keep well, helping them to look after themselves, maintain their independence, I think anybody who's interested in that, NANA has a place in helping them achieve it.
So basically, that video pretty much touches on the key aspects of diet assessment and designing tools, which is basically designing something that's elder friendly, thinking of the older adult as a whole person in terms of their quality of life as well as the diet, and also validating the tool for use, wider use and dissemination. So I think that's why I wanted to showcase that, because they've thought that through really well and designed it for the older adults, and they hope to help this get to caregivers and others. And Todd and I were talking about this virtual care that we're going to have to do, because there's going to be a lot of us that need to support older adults remotely, and this is a great way to sort of stay in touch with your older adult, in addition to visiting them periodically. So I want to end with the key takeaways, which really I think diet assessment and technology in the older adults should be very sensitive to and adapted to accommodate the heterogeneity in this group, both for age groups, for health, and for the diet needs in the older adults. And it is really good to think about minimal burden inputs and automated images from wearable cameras, spoken language derived data, and other attractive design options that would be really user friendly, which will then result in adoption and adapted use of that technology, and hopefully the data that results from that, which is our interest. And I think since this is going to be a large group that we're going to have to cater to, trying to use machine learning, robotics, artificial intelligence, and all of those things that will help with decoding all of these wearable related device data, is something that we should really be thinking about, because you're going to get someone that's wearing this device, but it's going to be 4 days worth of images that are every 1 minute or 5 minutes, and how are we going to get that to give us what we really need to learn from this individual and therefore the population? And thinking about that as creatively and getting together as we've discussed in the last few sessions, working cross-collaboratively and trying to do that is what we need to do. And I think we have a very bright future with regarding to getting there. So I want to end by thanking ILSI North America, Dr. Samin Medani, who was the one that networked into ILSI to bring me here today and have me enjoy this beautiful 2-day session. Dr. Roberts, who I work with very closely, and also on the project which is called Food Talk with MIT collaborators Jim Glass and Mandy Korpusik. Cheryl Gilhooly is the head of what's called core units that we have at the Human Nutrition Research Center. She's the head of the Dietary Assessment Unit, and we have our cross-collaborative conversations. I do want to thank Dr. Kerr for all the images and all the conversations, and Todd, we've had some nice conversations before we got here today. Dr. Clearfield and Tamara Harris as well for the initial conversations, for setting us up and getting us here, and the John Mayer USDA Center for housing me and giving me a roof to do all the things I like and have fun with doing. Thank you.